Hello and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. It's Bailey and I hope you're having a great Wednesday or whenever you're listening to today's episode. Just a reminder, you can watch over on YouTube if you want to get the visual here. I have my hair in a slicked back bun, which is making me look a little bald, but that's not probably why you tune in. You probably don't care all that much, but just wanted to remind you, you can also watch on YouTube. I'm actually in the nursery, which I've been in the last 3 weeks, wearing the same outfit that I wore last week. So I'm really exposing myself, adding in video, because you can actually see that I basically wear the same thing in a different form almost every day of the week. I also wanted to encourage you, if you've not yet left a rating or review, this would be a really fun time to do that. I love being able to put out episodes of the podcast, and I have had some new listeners over on YouTube, which has just been really fun. And of course, any opportunity to share the podcast, or if you're ever listening and you're like, I really think somebody would benefit from hearing this, send it their way. Just a little subtle shout out. When I was creating today's episode, I'm like, wow, this is a little egotistical. If you've obviously read the title of today's podcast, I'm giving you some insider scoop about me, things that even if you're really close to me, you might not actually know about me. The only person that probably knows all of these things would be my husband. So I'm really going to give you the dirt. And I was like, that's a little egotistical, Bailey. And then I was thinking more about it and I'm like, you have a podcast. Is that not egotistical in itself, right? That like you are speaking to an audience of people about yourself. And really that is not the foundation of the podcast. Of course, you know how I kind of wrap up the podcast is I always hope that you leave feeling encouraged and inspired to take care of your whole body health. And when I was thinking about the deeper meaning of why I wanted to create today's episode about myself, just some details about myself, I think that there's a lot of connection that can come with vulnerability, but I also hope to show you that if your life does not look mapped out perfectly, or if it had looked mapped out perfectly and it went a completely different direction, I hope this brings you some comfort, because for the first probably 2 years of my marriage, I was kind of all over the place in what I wanted to do long term. I was really thinking I wanted to have an adult job that looked very fancy on the outside, and I really cared about what the external appearance looked like. I think there was a lot of hesitation for me around what my job would be because I wanted to be able to provide to some level in our family. I didn't want to look like I was just living off my husband and not doing anything productive for society, which I could go into in itself, and nor do I believe everything about that narrative anymore. However, that's just kind of the place that I was at. So my health kind of really followed that trend. In the first couple of years, well, the first year of marriage, honestly, the first 2 months, I started to get really bad, like leaky gut symptoms. If you've ever experienced leaky gut or just digestive issues in itself, you'll know like you feel like you have the stomach flu all the time. You never really want to go do anything because we know how much serotonin is produced in your gut. If your gut's messed up, you're probably not going to be a super happy person or really want to socialize. And so I kind of like isolated myself, was very much in a negative space. And then a little bit further on in our marriage, again, this kind of persisted. I got into jobs that I didn't necessarily love, but I did. I lost my period, and that happened for about 4 to 6-ish months. And what we know about our period is that that is a good way to track how safe your body feels. That's how I like to explain it, right? If you are not consistently getting your period, or your period is super irregular, or you notice your period follows patterns of your mood, it is a sign that your body is missing something, right? For me, it was over-exercising, under-eating, the stress of not having a job that felt very fulfilling, the stress of not knowing what I wanted to do forever, very much in quotations forever, because you don't always have to do what you're doing right now forever. If you're still in your younger years of your occupation or haven't even entered into the workforce. But I really thought that I needed to have that solid, this is what I'm doing, this is how I can identify myself, this is how I can be a productive member of society. And my body just kind of shut down. And so that's kind of where I want to go with this. I'm going to start with some like lighthearted things, and we're honestly going to get a little bit more into it as I continue going. But that is really what I hope to just show you through kind of explaining more so around like what life looks like now, kind of how I grew up, what life looks like now, and then what life looked like in the different twists and turns that my life took. Again, that you might not even know if you were very close to me, because these were the dark ages is how I like to explain it. I was really going through it. I asked my husband, I'm like, what's something I could share that you don't think other people know? And we kind of came to the same conclusion, like there was a period of my time that was just kind of the darkest of dark. And relatively, like, it wasn't so bad looking back. But I would say from a health perspective, I was not the best version of my body was just not being supported adequately. My mental health was not being supported, and I just had to kind of go through that season to realize and kind of get to where I am right now, doing integrative health coaching, helping women, and honestly a lot of girls in their 20s work through some of the things I did emotionally, but then also supporting their body physically. We can't always control all the stress in our life, but I do think we can control how we adjust and adapt to it. And I'm in no sense of the word perfect when it comes to managing stress. I recently, I shouldn't even say recently, it's been a continuous recognition of like, oh, I'm getting a rash in a weird area of my body. Well, Bailey, what did your last week look like? Well, how many hours did you work? Are you still working over 50 hours a week? Yes, the answer is yes. So that's not a good balance, right? And it's something that I have to be very, very aware of, and I'm not super good about. However, I will say my body and the tactics I have to support my body have become so much more disciplined and so much more consistent, which I think has improved a lot of, or it kind of improved maybe the negative symptoms that show up when I overdo it. And so we're just going to get into it today. I know that was kind of like an all over the place intro, but I always want there to be a little bit more depth to these episodes than just like, hey, I'm Bailey, let me tell you some fun facts. I really want you to gain something from this. So I hope, like I said, more than anything, you gain just that awareness that life doesn't need to look perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. A lot of seasons of my life, I felt like I've had it all figured out, and then I realized we never really have it figured out. I mentioned this last week, but it's also kind of like that quote of the more you learn and the more you know, the more you realize you actually know nothing. That's kind of like where I feel like I'm at right now is I know what needs to be done. I know how to support my body and what needs to be done to support my body. I also know kind of the route that my life has taken, and I kind of have a plan for the future, but that's not to say things could all just go out the window. So find some comfort in knowing, of course, that you don't have to have it all figured out, but we're going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to give you about 12 kind of interesting tidbits, facts about me, and kind of how my life has evolved throughout my entire lifetime. So we are starting first with my religious affiliation. And I want to start with this because I think it's kind of interesting when I'm on Instagram and I post something about religion, like I will lose followers on Instagram. And I'm like, bless and release. That is something my mom has always told me. And I'm like, yeah, because I can't not talk about this. And if you're listening to the podcast, you probably recognize, like, I talk about my faith, I talk about God, we pray at the end of every episode. But when it comes to my religious affiliation, I actually grew up Mennonite. If you've heard the song Amish Paradise, you might be thinking, you know, okay, we are horse and buggy out here. That is typically what people think of when they think of Mennonite. It's because apparently a lot of Amish people are Mennonite. And I think it kind of boils down to some of like the beliefs of like that affiliation, but that is not the case. When I went to college, I remember a lot of people were like, oh, so like, do you have horse and buggies in your town? Like, no, we do not. We live just like everyone else. Look at me. I'm in college. Like, I drive a car. But that is what I grew up. I still go to a Mennonite church now that we've moved back home, but my whole family really has started in that church and we've kind of stayed there. When it comes to my family dynamic, I have one brother, just me and him. He is 5.5 years younger than me. And then my parents, my mom is a teacher and my dad is a farmer. And we're like kind of that like typical Midwestern household, right? A teacher and a farmer. And then of course my husband, he is a CPA. We live near my family. So we live in Nebraska, and I'm currently pregnant. If you didn't know, I'm expecting. The due date, which I didn't think I would share, and I'm like, well, to heck with it, is March 16. I'm not clinging to that date. I am praying baby does not come before that date because, like we said, I have a kind of a tendency to fit a lot of things into a certain period of time. And I know that this experience of having a child is going to rock that piece of my life because I can't have a rigid schedule all the time and follow it to a T like I like to do. Part of probably my OCD tendencies, I don't say that jokingly, like I've legit have I would say I have OCD, but we're not going to get into the weeds of that. I just like structure. I like routine. I like things to be organized. I like things to be kind of as they're meant to be, in a sense. And so that I know is going to change all of that, but really kind of in regards to expecting now, something about me too is I think growing up in a smaller family, I always really wanted a big family. So I'm like, okay, like how many kids do you want to have? And then the longer that I'm pregnant, the more I'm like, this takes a lot of patience. If pregnancy has taught me anything, it is that you have to be so patient because you are waiting over 9 months to meet this precious little human. So much so that we actually scheduled our 3D ultrasound for week 36. Because I'm like, I just need to see their little face. Like, I just want to see what they're going to look like. And the anticipation literally kills you. I'm like, I cannot wait to meet them. So, of course, all the dreams have come with that too, of like me having this baby early and all the things. But anyway, coming back to it, because I grew up in a smaller family, I always really envied bigger families. So we've never really talked about like how many kids we want to have. I mean, we maybe have. I always say we're going to keep having kids till we have a girl because I'm expecting a boy right now. And I don't know if that's true or if that's valid. That's just kind of something I always say. I'm like, if we get to like 3 kids, 4 kids, and we still don't have a girl, all right, maybe we can put a halt to things. But I'm 25, and we're having our first kid. So I always thought that growing up, I would have a family by like 23. And I started to realize as I got into college, and especially post-college, a lot of like my close friends aren't married yet and don't plan to have kids until like their later 20s. And for me, it's probably a small town thing, but everybody I feel like gets married young and starts having kids really young. And I'm not saying there's good or bad for either, but I think that was a huge shift I made in my own mind, is like my whole life does not need to be planned out and figured out by 25. And now that I'm 25, I'm recognizing, wow, like I'm so glad I have so much more time to figure things out, and I've taken that pressure off myself. And I think a really big piece of that is marrying my husband, who's from Omaha, so just like a bigger city. Again, he's older than me, so a lot of his friends are just now getting married. And it's allowed me to realize life does not need to be crammed into the first 5 years of your 20s. Like 20 through 25 does not need to be what makes or breaks that, right? Like you don't need to have it all figured out within that window of time. And I would say previously, especially even like fresh out of college, I still got married pretty young at 22. And I was like, boom, 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 like let's get it all figured out. But then now looking back, I'm so grateful, and I truly don't think my body would have been capable of carrying life that first year of our marriage, just with how impacted my health was by not just the physical toll I was putting on my body and honestly the abuse that I was putting on my body, but the mental toll. Like it just would not have been, I don't think it would have physically happened. Like I just was not in the place for that to happen. And so I'm really grateful for the 2 to 3 years of grace that I've had with myself from 22 to 25. Okay, so then another piece of this, kind of entering into that 20s, right? Like when we think about, okay, I have to have it all figured out. So fresh out of college, I graduated college in 3 years, and I was going to go to OT school. And as I started to go through my final year of undergrad, I'm like, maybe I want to go into like holistic health coaching, or maybe I want to be a personal trainer, or maybe I want to work within like corporate America and do wellness topics, be like a wellness coordinator. And so I decided not to apply then for OT school until the fall of that next year. And so I applied for OT school, and I actually got into OT school, but there were many series of events that caused me to not go. The first one being, as we had gotten married then, so I graduated in May, we got married in August. I then, fun fact, DoorDashed twice because I had no job. I was making no money. I was so confused with the trajectory of my life. I thought I wanted to go to OT school, but still was not very confident in that decision. And so I was gonna have a gap year regardless. Like I needed to find a job, something to do. And I thought DoorDash would be a great idea. I also did Instacart. I could give you just the most awful experiences with that. And it's like, why? You know, I come back to the why. Like, why did I have so much pressure on myself to make money and do all these things when all my basic needs were being met at that point? Like I didn't need to do this, but I did it. And there was one time, this was kind of the final straw. I only DoorDashed twice. Honestly, props to whoever does that, because the second time Nate came along with me because it was later in the evening. I'm like, well, heck, if I can make $150 in the evening, like let's just go DoorDash. So we went to this one place and they were having like this party and it smelled like drugs and it was a condo. And I was delivering to the sweet lady next door who had a cat, and it was just her. And I looked at Nathan, I'm like, I'm not getting out of the car. Like we were I would say, I know I'm small town minded maybe in that sense of like safety and security. But I'm like, I am not getting out of the car. Like I'm not going to bring that food to that lady. Like there is a lot of illegal things happening here. Like I don't want to get out of the car. And Nathan is like, this is your deal. This is not my deal. Like I'm not getting out of the car to do this for you. And so I had to put my big girl pants on and I walked and delivered the food and it went totally fine. But I like ran to the car. I'm like, this is it. I'm not doing this again. This is sketchy. This feels unsafe. I can't obviously confirm as somebody by myself. Like if I was to be there by myself, I would have absolutely freaked out. And so that was kind of the end of my DoorDash experience. There was also periods of time where this only happened twice, but I put together care packages and walked around downtown Omaha and delivered them to different homeless individuals on the streets. This was while my husband was at work. And my parents were like, Bailey, we get the desire to do something and fulfill like that servant heart, that servant role. I just don't think that is the thing that you should be doing by yourself in a city. You know, yeah. I just like there was something I was trying to fulfill. Big question mark to what that was. So then, like I said, I had gotten into OT school, and I'm on number 4, by the way, if you're keeping track of how many fun facts. I'm probably just spewing them out at this point. But I got into OT school, and then after my DoorDash experience, I got a job working at an orthopedic clinic, and I was kind of split in PT and OT. And I was in the hand clinic, and I realized that hand injuries are just not my cup of tea. Like they would be suturing or like mending or wrapping different things with the fingers, and I was leading people through exercises that had mobility issues with their hands. A job that needs to be in our society, right? Realized that was not necessarily for me. I will also say this, knowing that these people are not listening to my podcast, but they were not very nice. And I really went to work every day so stressed out that I'd get yelled at my job, or that I would disappoint someone or not do everything perfectly. And it put so much stress on me that I'm like, screw this. Like I'm not going to OT school. I've been so put off by the whole OT space, which again, did I give it a lot of chance? Not necessarily. But just being in that environment, like being inside a lot of the day, didn't feel very aligned. And there was so much paperwork to what they were doing. It was like, I would love working with people, but then the paperwork side of that is like probably double the amount of time you spend with the patient. You're just doing paperwork. And so I saw a side of it that I'm like, I just don't think that's the route for me. So we went back to the drawing board. And then I got a job working at a hospital in cardiac and pulmonary rehab, being a personal trainer and doing some of like the cardiac rehab side of things, which is where I met my friend Emily, the biggest blessing that came from that job. But again, like, I was not fulfilled. I was in a room all day leading functional movement, and although I love that and that was really fun, and I actually lead classes now doing functional movement, being in a room with no windows almost all day long was just not for me. And there was a lot of things that were being implemented that I didn't necessarily agree with. And when you're in the hospital setting, you don't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to talking about nutrition if you're not a dietitian. Which, good or bad, whatever, however you want to view that, it was extremely frustrating because cardiac and pulmonary rehab was still really preaching like, consume canola oil and vegetable oil, it's heart healthy. And I had people like freaking out because they were eating avocados and coconut oil. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but stick with the coconut oil. Like, don't go to the canola oil just because this is what they're teaching you in this program. So I was there for a tidbit of time, and then I actually started working at a coffee shop back in Omaha. So I had to commute for my job in the hospital. I was driving 45 minutes, if not more, every day, or 4 days a week, and then back home. So then I was like, you know, I'm really gonna start trying to grow my integrative health coaching business. I'm gonna put some time into that and make that a main focus of mine. So I got a job part-time at a coffee shop. Looking back, I wish I would have just been okay with having a job at a coffee shop because I had so much fun. It is still like a highlight of, I still work at a coffee shop in our area too, because it's just fun. Like, it's just an outlet for me and I love it. I think it gives you opportunity to connect with people, to talk to people. Making coffee is something I'm very passionate about, or just different drinks. So that has been so fun. But during this time, we know when you're growing a business, it's like, well, things don't really go how you think they're going to go. In between that, I had gotten certifications and everything, but in between that, it's like, you know, is this what I want to do? Nobody, like, there's not a lot of traction happening. It can feel really defeating in those first few months to years of having a business. And so I was talking to my husband. I'm like, I just don't know if this is fulfilling me. Again, I had a complete lack of direction, lack of understanding of like, what it took to actually grow a business, which I now understand. And I'm so grateful for all the experiences that I've had to get to this point, because as you can probably tell, it was a little brutal. But in those like, oh, do I want to do this? It would be so much easier to just work for somebody else, have a consistent paycheck. I actually started to go back to school for graphic design. Now, this sounds like maybe a curveball to throw in there, but my husband actually encouraged me, so I'm not putting all the blame on myself. And I do love graphic design, or at least I thought that I did, especially when it comes to like designing logos or designing websites. I love to do that, and I had done it for myself on my own website. So I'm like, well, I might as well like actually pursue this as a career. And what I realized is that graphic design utilizing Squarespace, like a website platform, is a lot different than using Squarespace, a website platform. And I did not like it. So I was going to actually get my bachelor's degree in graphic design and recognize that that was just not what I wanted to do. If you hear that insane barking, that is my dog in the background. She's a mini golden doodle, so not aggressive or scary at all, but we're just gonna keep rolling with it. So yes, I did drop out after 3 weeks of this graphic design program, which honestly, even my parents might be like, wait a second, you did that? Yes, I did, for 3 weeks, and I hated it. So luckily I could get refunded for that 3-week stint of graphic design that I tried to pursue. And then it was like, okay, we are getting into growing a business. There is no other option, or I'm at least not providing another option for myself. I'm not trying to provide an out. We are going to sit in the uncomfortableness of not having consistent income, or not maybe having consistent client base, and we're going to grow this. And that was now almost, 2.5, 3 years ago, which is insane. Now to get to the point where I am, where this is my full-time job, I just hope to reiterate to you how many different curveballs were in the span of that 2-year window for me, how many different avenues I tried to take, and honestly, it all kind of led me back to what I'm doing, which I know sounds really maybe cheesy, but it was needed. Like, I needed to explore all my options. I would say that's something about myself is I like to explore my options, know what it is all out there, and then oftentimes I probably come back to what I truly wanted to do. And I always am like, why did I cause all this hassle and all this harm to myself when I really could have just stuck with this, pursued it, made it a career, and not tried to look for everything and all the shiny objects that were kind of flashing around me at that time. So that is kind of a sum up of that stint up until not really now, but I like to give a little background, again, some tidbits of things about me to kind of show you, like I said, it doesn't need to look perfect. It doesn't need to be polished or prestigious. And I think something I've really recognized over the last few years is that you don't need a job to look official or formal. Even now, I have to accept that people probably think I don't do anything. Like that could very validly be something that you think about me, like, oh, Bailey, she doesn't really work. I think she has a little business. And that is something I'm okay with because I'm so at peace with the decisions I've made leading up to now, although they were not perfect and they were not shiny and they did not look appealing, or were they appealing all the time? It now has allowed me to have such confidence in where I'm at, and not that our purpose is linked to a job or role, but I feel like a lot of the characteristics I have allow me to live out this occupation and this role in my life with such a passion and fire for it. And that's kind of getting into number 6. I'm not really going in order here, but I'm actually a very passionate person and could really get into intense conversations around conversations. Some examples being like vaccines or research bias or nutrition myths or pregnancy rules that you're supposed to follow that I think are kind of BS. But I'm probably never will because I don't like confrontation, really don't like confrontation. And I know telling myself that I don't like confrontation does not make it any better, but that is something that feels very uncomfortable for me. And I also don't like to hurt other people's feelings. Like, who does? But to me, there is so much guilt that comes when somebody disagrees with me or somebody's upset with me that makes me just feel physically sick. So although I have a lot of opinions, there might be some episodes where I get into it, specifically those topics, but my husband knows more than anyone. If I am getting on my soapbox, it is really hard to take me down from it because I will see some things, and this is where I've had to set boundaries with social media too, because I'll see some things and it just really triggers me and I'm like, oh, I just want to say something to this person, but I won't. And I just won't, because I also believe that not everybody always needs to know your opinion all the time, which is something that I think with social media, we kind of forget. And I know I give my opinion. I have a platform where I talk about things and I share my opinion on different topics, okay? Like, I'm very well aware that I do share my own opinion. But I think it's this concept of when we disagree with somebody, we feel such an urge to need to like comment something mean on a post or DM someone. And I've noticed myself pull back from sharing because of that reason, is we think that we need to give input or feedback to something we disagree with. When in reality, we have the ability to control what we see. So if you follow somebody and you feel really triggered by what they say or they post, you can unfollow them. And that's something I wouldn't have recognized without, I don't know, kind of the evolution and confidence I've built within myself, which I would not say I'm an overly confident person, but I have become fairly confident in the things that I view as kind of in alignment with my morals and my character, and things that I just wouldn't really back up. And I think that's where we have to recognize, like, we don't always have to give our opinion. You can disagree, and it's okay to disagree. I think we should disagree with each other. And I think we should be okay with having conversation around things that maybe make us uncomfortable or to be kind of corrected in a sense. But at the same time, like, the reason that I think it's hard is because we all think we need to share our opinion. And like I said, it kind of just creates so much confusion and frustration or hurt feelings. And so that's why I just keep really quiet. So my husband is probably the only person who will ever truly know how passionate I get about some things, but I am a researcher. I love to like get into the thick of the weeds. I love to listen to podcasts, which I know don't count necessarily as research, but I do like to know what I don't know and get to the bottom of like what is causing somebody to believe something. And so that is where, like I said, I have a lot of opinions. I don't share them all the time for lack of wanting to confront people or hurt people's feelings, but I do love to research. I'm kind of a little bit of this sounds very pick me, but I'm kind of a little bit of a nerd when it comes to that. Like, I want to know as much as humanly possible. All right, number 7 here is that I live on a farm in Nebraska, like I said, with 2 ducks. We had 4, 2 of them have now passed, and 12 chickens. Something else is I've butchered chickens 4 times in the last year. So we're kind of taking a little twist here, but it's something about my life that I love. I love living on a farm. I love having animals. I don't show a lot of that side of me just because I kind of keep personal things personal. All right, number 8 is I despise ranch. And honestly, one time I cried because it got on me. I'm disgusted by ranch. And I know this is probably the most controversial take that I'll ever have on the podcast. It is so gross to me. I don't like the taste. I don't like the smell. I am also don't do well with lactose all the time. So it just really gives me the biggest ick. Okay, number 9, my love language is quality time. If you want to make me feel loved, or if I want to show love to somebody else, because I also know our love language is honestly typically how we show love, it is spending undivided attention, or it is giving somebody undivided attention and spending time with them. I love that. I love, even if it's like a walk with friends or getting coffee, there's just something about spending quality time with people that makes me feel very loved, but also is how I show love. All right, kind of rapid fire here. Number 10, my husband gave me this one. I love a good car snack. Now this is getting kind of random, but I promise I'm going to be finishing with when I almost got abducted, so stick with me. But I love to snack in the car, which is multitasking at its finest and not a good form of multitasking. My husband is actually cleaning out the car recently. He's like, I found an orange peel in between the seat. And I'm like, oh yeah, one time when I was driving, I was peeling an orange. Like, ugh, why? Why do I do that? Mostly it is if he's driving. I just like to have a snack in the car. Not necessarily when I'm driving because that's multitasking. And I try to be very intentional with sitting down with my meals, focusing on what I'm doing in that moment. But if he's driving, I will probably bring a snack along with me. Number 11, I love the beach, but I hate sand. Hate sand. I honestly think this is what defers me from wanting to go on any beach vacation. I would much rather go hiking somewhere because I really just hate sand. It gets everywhere, especially if you get wet or your feet get wet, you have it all over you. As much as I want to love the beach and love relaxing on the beach, sand really just makes me want to gag. And that's something I probably need to work through on my own, but I don't love sand. So if I'm gonna go on a vacation, my ideal vacation would be somewhere where we could see the ocean, experience life on the ocean, minimal encounters with sand, and do a lot of hiking. Like, I love to be active on vacation. More so would rather go on a trip probably than an actual vacation where your point is to relax, because I like to just go. I like to do things. I like to get up early, eat a good breakfast, and get going for the day when we travel. All right. Number 12, the final one, and I have to finish with the story of when I almost got abducted, because it's a point about me that, you know, I don't like to publicize because I probably was being dumb, but at the same time, when we lived in Omaha, we're just gonna get into it. When we lived in Omaha, specifically downtown Omaha, I would walk a lot. Like Nathan and I probably averaged like 4 miles a day. We would go for walks, and I loved that. I loved having that moment in my day. Again, I wasn't really at a job that I loved or fulfilled me, so how I did that was getting outside, getting fresh air, and got out of our apartment that had very minimal exposure to sun. Well, the College World Series happens in Omaha every year, and it's typically when there's just a lot of people from out of state come to Nebraska. And so I was going for a walk, and if you live in the area, you'll know the CHI Health Event Center is in downtown Omaha, and there's an area where you can walk up higher to go to like upper seating. And then if you keep walking straight, you can get to the bridge that goes over the river from Nebraska into Iowa. So the iconic thing is typically you can like not typically, you can stand in 2 states at once. It's like the thing. Well, anyway, that was a route that I would take pretty consistently. So I was walking up towards that CHI area, and all of a sudden this guy comes out from behind a bush and he has blood down his face. I couldn't tell if it was real or not. And he's like, stop, you have to help me, come here, I need you to help me. Like trying to get me directed towards the area that he just came out of. And I freaked out. I was like, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Because it just did not feel right. You know, like when your stomach like sinks and you're like, there's something that feels off about this situation. I don't feel safe. My intuition was like throwing me signals like, this is not okay. What's happening is not normal. You need to get out of there. And so he did that. And I like looked at him with a panicked face and I like started speed walking. And he just kept getting closer to me and closer to me. And I was about to lose it. And he was like, gosh, you don't have to be so paranoid. I just need your help. I'm like, that's like exactly what somebody would say if they were trying to abduct me, is trying to make me feel guilty for like not following you off into this like secluded area where you could, I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want my mind to go there. So luckily, by the grace of God, truly, this gal started then walking up towards the walkway and he like scurried off and like hid. And I was like, I mean, that is divine timing at its finest, right? Like this lady came up and he disappeared. And I'm like, I truly in that moment thought I was going to be abducted. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I know that maybe now as I'm retelling it, it's not like quite as intense as it felt in the moment. But at any time when you are a lady walking by yourself and you have a man come up to you aggressively with blood dripping down his face, it's going to be alarming in itself, let alone when they're trying to lure you to go help them in a secluded area. And so I learned from that moment on, I was not going to be walking by myself anymore, especially not during the College World Series when there's just a lot of different individuals in town. And I'm sure a lot of not great things happen just because there's people from all over the world. And a lot of people, you know, you think like Nebraska, like it's pretty safe, and it is. But at the same time, when there are kids that are just running about, right? And families with young kids, like it just brought a different level of awareness to me of like, no, I'm not going to just trust everyone and anyone. And that was a moment in my life where I'm like, I am done living in the city. As like that moment was enough. So then honestly, that next year we moved out to kind of like the suburbs of Omaha, and then we moved here a year later. So finishing up with that one, 12 fun facts and a lot of filled in conversation in the middle. Again, I did this because I think that there is just some things, like when we look at somebody's life on the outside, we're like, oh, it's all neat and tidy, and hopefully that's not the projection you get of me. But at the same time, there's just been a lot that's happened in my life in the last 5 years, and I'm so grateful to no longer feel like everything in my life needed to be accomplished by 25, because it's not. And there are so many twists and turns that happen. So if you find yourself in a similar maybe situation that I did when I was, 22 through up until now, please rest assured that you don't have to have it all figured out. As long as your basic needs are being met, truly just take your time to figure out what you want things to look like for yourself and not try to force anything. I would say the biggest takeaway I've gained from even just sharing more about my life and sharing about those bits and pieces of my life that you might not have known or that I've not really shared is that I don't force things anymore. Like if things don't feel comfortable or instinctually aligned, or just that they would like fit into my life and benefit me or my family or my lifestyle, I don't force it. And that is very different from previous me. Kind of very transparently, my hope in the next couple of years is to get my doctorate degree in naturopathic medicine. Like that is my top, what I want out of my life, occupational wise, and even just like education wise. And so many times I've tried to force, or I've thought like, oh, I should just do it. And I've realized every time that I ignore that voice, I probably end up in a place that I don't actually want to be. Same like if I say yes to things, kind of like impromptu, typically I don't actually want to do those things. Like I've recognized and realized the importance of like reflecting and taking time to make a decision rather than just jumping into anything that is screaming at you, which can be really hard to do. So I know today's episode wasn't super deep, and it wasn't hopefully it was a little interesting to you. Hopefully you feel like you've gotten to know me a little bit more about me. If you want to hear more of like my health story, my health history, go back and listen to the first episode I ever recorded. It's my raw and real health journey. Gives you a lot more details about, like I said, all those moments and seasons where I didn't know what I wanted to do occupationally that I talked about here. It gives you more of like the health background of me and what led me to ultimately do what I'm doing now. So go back and listen to that episode if you, again, want a little bit more of like the health focused details about my life. But with that, let's go ahead and close today's episode in prayer. So dear Lord, just thank you for today. Thank you for the podcast and the opportunity to share openly with people and share a little bit more about myself. I pray for NN and that as she gets prepared for her race this week, that she feels energized and that she fuels her body right so she can have energy to just perform at her best ability. I also pray for MF and just that financial security and that stress that can come when we don't feel like we have that security, that just dissipates and that she finds strength and comfort in you, in the plan that you have for her life. That she trusts that, wherever she might be in whatever financial situation she's in, that you ultimately know what is best for her and that you also ultimately know what the future looks like. So although right now might feel rocky or might feel uncomfortable, that she just clings to you in this season and trusts that you will provide. I also pray for EB and her family and her friends and her close friends that have been impacted by cancer and the death that have come from cancer, and that just disease and the prevalence that it has in society right now just starts to feel less heavy. I think it can feel like it's all around us and that everyone's impacted, and we probably are, but that we just experience both true healing from you by putting our trust in you in whatever health concern we come to you with, and that those who have passed have found security in you and peace and getting to live the rest of their experience with you, and that we here on earth can find comfort in knowing that too. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so if you're interested in following along with my life outside of the podcast, you can find me at Nourish with Bailey on Instagram. Of course, you can also find this recorded video over on YouTube and Bailey Seaton on almost every other platform. My email is in the description of today's episode along with my email. If you're interested in getting any sort of blood work or one-on-one coaching, I will be wrapping that up March 1st just because baby is coming quickly and I want to make sure I can pour into you and invest my time into you within this next month and kind of give you direction moving forward if that's something that you desire. All right, so with that, I'll talk to you again